Joining me today is Denis Campbell. He's editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine. He also hosts Worldview with Denis Campbell on YouTube at youtube.com/worldviewshow. Denis, we've had, of course, on Monday, the Navy Yard shooting, 34-year-old Aaron Alexis identified as the shooter. And there has been a wide range of media coverage surrounding this in the U.S., and I'm curious, starting first with the Navy Yard shooting, and then we can move on and discuss kind of coverage of Syria and military action. How has the media coverage in the UK differed or maybe been similar to the coverage that the incident got here in the US?
Well, as it was occurring and there was quite a bit of confusion, I do a lot of work with the BBC, for example, and they literally called me and put me on air on my cell phone talking about the area, having spent 4 or 5 years in Washington, D.C. But there was more, I would say, restraint there from the BBC. They're trying to understand, what is the situation? Where is it located? How many people are there? What are the impacts and effects going to be around the city? And they expect me obviously to say, look, it's too early to speculate as to who, how many, what motives. It's a changing situation, but they tend to be a little bit more reserved. There was a little bit more coverage later in the evening and some on the morning programs, but then it pretty much disappeared. It didn't have the wall-to-wall 24/7 feel of cable news in the US. I mean, news here is still pretty much appointment telly, except for the BBC News Channel. And even then, they tend to repeat stories 2 or 3 times an hour.
Right, and then that kind of gets us into the discussion of when you decide when the 24-hour breaking news cycle kind of starts, you've opened a door that is then very hard to close, or more like it's very hard to get the toothpaste back in the container, so to speak, back in the tube, because you've created the need to keep generating news about the topic, and then it ends up with one of two things: the regurgitation of the exact same few facts for hours and hours, or you open up the door to poor coverage, and that seems to be something that is now almost expected in American media.
Oh, absolutely. And it was actually stunning. There was a piece on The Daily Show last night that was talking about the coverage of CNN in particular, because if you remember all the way back to the Boston bombing, they had people jumping up and down in front of cameras trying to get attention for absolutely nothing but pure speculation. And Jon Stewart last night showed a clip of Jeff Zucker, the head of CNN, talking about, how and why they do what they do. And they said, yeah, we got it wrong and we apologized, but our audience ratings were up to a high not seen in 10 years. And I'm convinced that at some level, it's this pursuit of ratings to get, we've talked about this before privately, David, the rabid left and the rabid right together in each other's face, making a lot of noise. That's all that seems to matter. And somebody actually said at one point, it might have been you when we were chatting, that, if they are surfing with their remote control, that the news networks want to see people in somebody's face. They want to see somebody excited. They want to see something going on that's dramatic that gets the viewer to stop. Now, I've got a problem with that from a news perspective, because you're obviously creating news. You're obviously fueling rampant speculation. You're not helping the situation one bit. And when you talk about Syria, the drumbeat towards war, well, if you've got rabid left and rabid right going at each other tooth and nail, you're always going to be in a situation where the only solution is to bomb, 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 bomb.
Well, let's explore that one, because the Navy Yard shooting did make international news, but it really was kind of a domestic thing. So I think Syria gets us to a different type of conversation, which is once the discussions start about military action, here in the U.S., there was this kind of like a march towards a climax, so to speak. And the climax was expected by many to be some kind of military action. And there's this kind of interim period after the initial nonstop coverage of Syria starts, but before there's really any decision about what will happen in Syria, where it's not clear what is the coverage. Is the coverage kind of like a, we're still expecting military action, isn't it? And it almost starts to continue the drive towards the military action, not in the sense that media coverage will really cause military action. But once you start going down that path, you have to continue covering it. And it's very hard to on a certain day say, okay, all the buildup around Syria, it's kind of stopped and we're going to back off and we'll just let you know what happens. How do you make the transition? Here in the US, it's very tough. I don't know if that same thing is happening in news reports in the UK.
Not at all. As a matter of fact, one of the stunning things about that whole Syrian debate was when the House of Parliament had that astonishing debate that went on for about 6 or 7 hours about whether or not the UK should become involved. And it was really riveting television because there wasn't a single talking head other than the member of parliament who was standing there making the case, either for or against. And most of them were coming up against for very logical, well thought out reasons. What I see happening on media in the USA is that there's still the remnants of the neocons, the John McCains and the Lindsey Grahams that want war at all costs and, want to paint President Obama into a corner as weak. And on the other side, you've got people that are saying, well, because he's taking time and deliberating and eventually came up with a decision that ended up with the U.S. not going to war and not bombing anyone, probably for the first time, it was really astonishing to sort of watch the way in which the media expressed their disappointment in the form of anger at President Obama, calling him a ditherer or calling him, someone incapable of taking a decision. And indeed, his entire second term is gone because of this.
That's exactly right. I'm reminded of after the WikiLeaks, the Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange WikiLeaks came out. There was this video that I always refer to when I think about these things of Wolf Blitzer going on CNN, and he's visibly angry. Not at the incredible crimes that were revealed by those leaks provided to WikiLeaks by Chelsea Manning, but by the fact that the leaks were leaked. In other words, a journalist, someone who presumably makes a job out of investigating, asking questions that people may not want to answer, angry not that we found stuff out, but angry that some stuff was leaked. It was completely upside down for me, and it's been the same thing with Syria.
It's been that way with Assange. It's been that way with anything that goes out. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Pentagon Papers in 1974, which I remember because I was in high school at the time. And, you look at things and you look at the way in which the media builds the case against the individual who is supposedly presumed innocent until found guilty in a court of law. But in these cases, the rush to judgment has been severe, and the rush by even the U.S. government to try and capture these guys and shut them up has been severe. And indeed, I think when you look at the vast amount of knowledge we've gotten from the leaks of Edward Snowden as to the lengths and depths of spying around the world, it's even damaged diplomatic relationships with Brazil, with the Brazilian president canceling a state visit. I mean, there's a number of countries around the world that are very upset, and they're even now trying to set up their own internet to get away from the potential of spying.
Right, and actually after the next break, we'll be talking about how some Brazilian hackers thinking that NASA, not the NSA, was the problematic organization, hacked NASA. But that's kind of another story altogether. We've been speaking with Denis Campbell. He is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, youtube.com/worldviewshow. Check it out. And Denis, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.